Om Bhurbhuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Om. This is the most ancient prayer for enlightenment. Such a powerful mantra that it's historically been given as the first mantra during the initiation process to young people, and to be with them their whole life. A prayer for enlightenment. Now, we've talked a lot about perception in one way, how we see things, but it's not a physical thing. It's primarily a matter of interpretation. Because, as you know, when you look at an optical illusion, it can be seen in at least two different ways, if not more. So an artist renders something, and some people see it as one thing, and other people see it as another thing, and then they can argue over what is it, until finally your perception changes. If the other person points out, oh, if you look at it this way, then here's the figure of the bird, or whatever it is, or the one with it looks like two vases. Two vases. But then if you look at it another way, it's two faces looking at one another, So if somebody points it out to you, then you're like, oh, I didn't see that before. But you can only see one at a time. You're either going to see the face or the vase, You're not going to ever be able to see both at once. But now that you know that they're both there, you can also never unknow it. It's forever. You'll be able to look at that and say, oh yes, I know there are two pictures here in this one picture. Similarly, when we reach enlightenment, that means see the unity in everything all the time. We can never unknow that. Even though we may be dealing with the particulars, the vyavaharika, the relative, the what's right in front of us at the moment, we still know that behind it all is this ultimate unity. So this is the kind of perception that Vedanta is attempting to point out to us. That there is another way, and it's trying to give pointers how to arrive at that vision, so that vision can be, like I said, you can flip into that at any time. We have to analyze our own souls, Swamiji says, and to find out what is there. We have to understand it and to realize what is understood. That is religion. So with all the questions of life, we must come to facts. There are certain religious facts which, as in external science, have to be perceived, and upon them, religion will be built. Reasoning is the method. Here's a definition. Reasoning is the method of comparison between certain facts which we have already perceived. If these perceived facts are not there already, there cannot be any reasoning. If this is true of external phenomena, why should it not be so also of the internal? But the vast majority of mankind think, especially at the present time, that no such perception is possible in religion, that religion can only be apprehended by vain arguments. So we kind of went over that a little bit previously, where he was exhorting us not to depend strictly on what other people in ancient times or previous ages or whatever have understood, but to attain that understanding ourselves. So he urges us to observe and investigate and test our own perception ourselves. The question is religion to justify itself by the discoveries of reason through which every other science justifies itself? Are the same methods of investigation which we apply to sciences and knowledge outside to be applied to the science of religion? In my opinion, this must be so. If a religion is destroyed by such investigations, it was then all the time useless, unworthy superstition, and the sooner it goes, the better. I am thoroughly convinced that its destruction would be the best thing that could happen. All that is dross will be taken off, no doubt, but the essential parts of religion will emerge triumphant out of this investigation. Not only will it be made scientific, as scientific at least as any of the conclusions of physics or chemistry, but it will have greater strength. Here's the point. Because physics or chemistry has no internal mandate to vouch for its truth, which religion has. Remember, he talked about the constitutional necessity. So this internal mandate, which is inside each person, to verify and to know when they have attained the proper, I don't want to use the word conclusion exactly, it's really much more of an intuitive grasp. That, he is saying, is the essence of religion. So he's comparing it, the scientific method, between physical sciences and religion, and the conclusion is it will have greater strength because physics or chemistry has no internal mandate to vouch for its truth, which religion has. So, we talked about the essence of life before, and this is what he's basically saying. This life phenomenon, it's kind of mysterious in a way. Life, the bio energy, prana, how it continues generation after generation, the forms that it takes come and go, but the life process itself goes on. It cannot be taught in lectures, for it is life, and life can only convey life. That's sort of like the statement that, he would say, religion must be caught. It can't be taught, it must be caught. Okay? So, and the reason, the how it's caught is in the same way that one candle is lit by another candle. You can't just chant at the candle and think that it's going to light of its own. You have to light it from another candle, or you have to get the flame or the fire from somewhere else. So in a sense, this is kind of what he's saying. As life itself works in that way, so does the religious fulfillment work in that way. So it's always been recognized within the Hindu tradition that this is the role of the teacher, the guru. Now, some of us are very fortunate to have have had a teacher in the physical body to be able to set us on our path, get us going, whatever. And other people have not yet found that teacher, and or may not need to at some point, because sometimes a lot of people say you can't get it from books, and to a large extent that's true if you're just reading the book. But if that book or that teacher from the book, let's say, is in a sense radiating out from those pages Sometimes that can happen that way too. Like, okay, I'll give you one example. There's this huge book written by Sri Aurobindo, The Life Divine, okay? Oh, talk about heavy. That book is so heavy. It is so difficult. I could never read more than maybe 5 pages at a time, more usually 3, because it was so dense, okay? But I remember one time reading this book, and I fell asleep. And I had a dream. And in the dream, I was reading the book. And I shut the book, closed the book. You know, you can hear it. When you shut a big book, it makes a noise, right? And I said, and I realized, that means that we are living the infinite life right now. Right now. And that kind of thing can happen to us if we're kind of ready for it. You know, the person has to be more than just having their eyes scan a page. Okay, there has to be a real connection in a sense. So that's what I mean. How there's some spark, there's some impetus that goes from one mind who may have passed away a long time ago but left an imprint on the page, and then we pick it up. Or maybe we can't credit ourselves with picking it up, but that's the way it works. If something happens, it's not really in our control. Each science requires certain preparations. We must observe in order to have a real science. I think that's kind of what I'm talking about. Part of the observation when we are doing formal study is that kind of in-depth reading, one line at a time, and being sure that we understand the full import of each sentence. But the other part is observing life and living things, and how things operate, and how they operate together, and how the interdependence is so evident, but we normally don't pay any attention to it. This globalization that we talk about all the time, it can be either positive in the sense that, communication, we can know instantly what's going on the other side of the world, or it can be negative in the sense of, yes, but the people on the other side of the world have taken our jobs, whatever. But globalization, the one important thing about the whole thing is that ultimately every person on this earth is going to have to realize we have a very small planet. That's the thing that's got to hit every single person, and therefore we've got to get along, because we have nowhere else to go. And we have to all depend on the same elements for existence. So that kind of observation where a person reaches a greater understanding. Without proper analysis, any science will be hopeless, mere theorizing. The science of Raja Yoga proposes to give us a means of observing the internal states. So here we go. This is the deal. This science, which deals with the mind, which moves all the time, mind moves all the time, the moment you want to study it, it slips. Now the mind is in one mood, the next moment perhaps it is different, changing all the time. In the midst of all this change, it has to be studied, understood, grasped, and controlled. How much more difficult, then, is this science? It requires rigorous training. Well, we don't follow exactly the way the Sankhya/yoga or Raja Yoga operates, in the sense of all those 8-limbed yogas and all this kind of thing. Well, because we have the Vedantic understanding to go by. But we can at least slow the mind down. And that is where our mantra practice comes in. Even We had kirtan last night, so singing and chanting or something like that has a remarkable calming influence on the mind. And then we can try and contemplate or meditate as we've been instructed to do. And then over time, and I don't mean weeks necessarily, unless a person is particularly adept, but years, the mind actually will start cooperating. And it will settle down more. And it will allow you to gain some degree of peace, because you only have to look at it in a way and say, okay, enough right now. And it will, of course, it'll try and revive. I mean, it does that. But at least you know that you're beginning to get some degree of command over it. To turn the mind, as it were, inside, stop it from going outside, and then to concentrate all its powers and throw them upon the mind itself in order that it may know its own nature, analyze itself, is very hard work. Yet, that is the only way to anything which will be a scientific approach to the subject. So the only person who can know whether it's working or not is the one who's attempting to do it. It's really nice when you get these scientists, rigging up all kinds of electrodes on the meditator and stuff, and they can say, oh yeah, well the brain waves switched from this to this and that. But so what? That is not going to benefit anyone. It's the meditator who's getting the benefit. You can't think you're going to siphon off, as a scientist, can't siphon off that other person's experience and make it your own. You still have to do it yourself if you're going to find out what it's all about. So I really wish they'd stop doing that. They've done it enough to know that yes, there is an effect. Now let's get down to actually practicing, The science of Raja Yoga proposes to put before humanity a practical and scientifically worked out method of reaching this truth. Every science must have its own method of investigation. The ideal of the yogi, the whole science of yoga, is directed to the end of teaching men how, by intensifying the power of assimilation, to shorten the time for reaching perfection. Now this is another one of these packed statements. Intensifying the power of assimilation. Okay, that's basically real education. That's what real education is to assimilate what one has been taught. Not just to be able to memorize and regurgitate, but to make it part of one's own constitution, so that it has its own kind of chemistry inside, and you take that information and you modify it for your own situation. Then it becomes a tool. That information becomes a tool to your own use, and ultimately perhaps to the use of other people, because it's a type of creativity, just because, for instance, your monkeys, if you give them a stick and they learn how to crack a nut by going like this, on the nut, they could be doing that for thousands of years. It's the monkey who finally decides, well, it would be better if I took a big rock like this, and then I only have to do this once, bam, and there's the nut broken open, right? The idea of hitting, going from one object to another object, is a little bit of a stretch, perhaps, for the monkey. Well, this is what human beings are capable of doing all the time. We take a basic understanding and then we extrapolate it to whatever it is that we need to do. Now, the only way that we can do that is by this process of assimilation. If we haven't assimilated the information first, then it just remains in our head as a piece of information. Useless except maybe to be handed on to the next person. I mean, I can explain it to the next person. Maybe they'll get it and maybe able. So that's the thing with spiritual life, is getting it means putting it into practice. That assimilation comes through. Others can observe exactly what you do, how you do it, etc. The teachers, the gurus know how to interpret. They know which students are making progress and which ones aren't. They can see by watching them. The student doesn't have to say, "Oh yeah, I got it, master." No, the teacher knows because he can see the alterations in behavior and how things are proceeding. So, to shorten the time for reaching perfection. Now, I have a problem with the word perfection because in the English language it makes some problems. So I would substitute the word for reaching wholeness, for reaching fulfillment, completeness. These are what he's meaning by perfection. So to reach the time for reaching wholeness, I think, or integration is also a very good word. Integration, so that we don't have all these different parts. Yesterday we went through the 5 koshas, the 5 different sheaths that were considered to be made of the body, mind, intellect, ego, and the bliss sheath. Each of those, if we're, let's say, a non-religiously inclined, hopeless human being, somebody who's just kind of surviving and has never had any instruction in any kind of spirituality or whatever, the likelihood of all 5 of those sheaths being aligned is rather low, okay? Because the mind is going to go off in this direction, and the emotions, and then the body is engaged in these things, and then the intellect, who knows what value system it's operating under, and so the person is fractionated. So when we come under spiritual influence, or we decide that we look at our own situation. This is the first thing. So if we look at our own situation, we come in contact, or we have some kind of a yearning, we know something's wrong, because all these different parts of ourselves are going in all these different directions, and we're being pulled this way and we're being pulled that way, and we don't know how to respond, and then we get all mixed up, and then we get angry or whatever, okay? So the person finally looks at himself and says, or herself, and says, I'm a mess. I need to do something with this, okay? That's like step 1. Oh, okay. Then it's like, well, let me find out how I can do something about this. So thus begins the spiritual quest, okay? Some people start with a psychological quest, but then that morphs into a spiritual quest. Okay, so now we have a spiritual quest, and we have decided that we have to do something about it. So then we maybe pick up on different practices here and there. There's a lot of pop psychology kinds of things, self-help and this and that, and we start with that kind of thing, and then maybe we go on until we find a definite spiritual path, and we start following that. And then we find that, we're not as disintegrated as we were. It's starting to, kind of pull together. Well, the point of this whole thing about shortening the time for reaching perfection is to align all those sheaths so they're all operating in the same, they're all operating together, let's put it that way, they're operating together. And we're not being we don't feel like we're being pulled in different directions. Our concept of self has actually become simplified. because we don't have all these different ideas of ourselves going in all these different directions. We now know we're an integrated person, one being, okay? And then from there, we can further assimilate that we're not really a person at all if we're on a spiritual path. We are consciousness itself. We are the divine in human form. One tiny little aspect of the divine is the human form. But remember, as we talked about the holograms yesterday, in that is the whole of it. Okay? So this is what we're trying to assimilate, and we do that on the Vedanta path through inquiry. So he says, Swamiji says, what I mean is that in their inquiry into the principle, the Hindu thinkers were as bold, and in some cases much bolder than the moderns. They made some of the grandest generalizations that have yet been reached, and some still remain as theories, which modern science has yet to get even as theories. And that's what the Dalai Lama basically says too, even now. You and your consciousness, he talks to the scientist, your consciousness studies, we can't even talk to one another because we're not on the same wavelength. I mean, you're still, you have to change you're still thinking that consciousness comes out of matter, arises out of matter. It's exactly the opposite. So, so this inquiry ultimately leads us into consciousness itself. We have not yet found that one by knowing which everything else will be known. Now, he took that right from the Upanishad, of course. But he's encouraging us to pursue that quest. Now, the consciousness, let's talk a little bit about consciousness. Because there's another... we can think of, when we think of consciousness aside from as it manifests within an individual, because sometimes we think, okay, we have our own consciousness. We're not aware that we're participating in a larger phenomenon. So sometimes when we talk about, let's say, consciousness with a large C, we could also, to remind ourselves, we can say it's cosmic intelligence. Cosmic intelligence. It's impersonal. It's an impersonal power. But sometimes in the writings, you will still see it lumped under the category in English of knowledge, under the word knowledge. And that is, you read that word, you have to really look, in what way are they understood? Are they presenting this word? Because knowledge is too limited in English. Okay, it's too limited. But yet that's the word that was chosen a couple hundred years ago to mean what we mean by consciousness now. So when you're reading something, are they, you have to look at it and read it very closely. Are they talking about knowledge in the ordinary sense, or are they talking about this kind of he's going to call it superconsciousness here as we go along, because in those days he had to differentiate it from what was generally understood. Okay, so here he says, you understand what is meant by knowledge. Knowledge is pigeonholing a new impression with old ones, recognizing a new impression. What is meant by recognition? Finding associations with similar impressions that one already has. So a comparison. Nothing further is meant by knowledge. Now this is the ordinary use of the word knowledge. If that is the case, if knowledge means finding the associations, then it must be that to know anything, we have to see the whole series of its similars. Is that not so? It is very... Now he's going to switch to the cosmic intelligence. It is very important to understand this question of Mahat. The great principle, the intelligence. This intelligence itself is modified into what we call egoism, and this intelligence is the cause of all the powers in the body. It covers the whole ground. Now remember, this was in the heyday, or actually just prior probably to the heyday of Freud. Freud, who was the father of modern psychoanalysis and psychology. He's the one who kicked off the whole, jump-started the whole field, and obviously Swamiji was aware of what was going on in that infant field at that time too. So, and he is relating it to what is found in the Sankhya philosophy that came, that was the first great philosophy in the Indian subcontinent. So I'll read this again. This intelligence itself is modified into what we call egoism, and this intelligence is the cause of all the powers in the body. It covers the whole ground, subconscious, consciousness, and superconsciousness. So he's introducing this word superconsciousness for what we nowadays would call the consciousness with a large C, or the cosmic intelligence, something that is not personal at all. Man can become like God and acquire control over the whole universe if he multiplies infinitely his center of self-consciousness. Consciousness, therefore, is the chief thing to understand. But you can't do that with a mind that is going everywhere. That's why the mind has to be settled down, and the mind has to kind of obey commands, like a dog does. Sit, dog sits, the dog starts to get up there, nope, sit, like that. So let's see if how this goes. First, he's going to discuss briefly subconscious. He's talking about subconscious, like impressions. We are not aware of their presence in us, but there they are, unconsciously influencing our body and mind. Every movement that is now being made without the help of consciousness was previously conscious. So, in other words, we have habitual things that we do. It's so habitual, we don't think about it. We don't think about driving. The key goes in, we start, we know exactly. We don't think about this. We're thinking about something completely different. What we're going to have for supper, what we're going to buy at Trader Joe's, whatever. And it happens automatically. Sufficient impetus has been given to it to work of itself. So that's habit. That's subconscious, or the unconscious is where our habits lie. They've just become rote, automatic. So we're going to jump over the normal conscious level here. There's a study that I haven't completed that I started with Swamiji, and that is, I'm convinced that most of the time, I'm just going to give you like an introduction to this. Most of the time, when Swamiji talks about consciousness, he's usually talking about our ordinary consciousness. Most of the time, when Ramakrishna talks about consciousness, he's talking about cosmic consciousness. If you go through the writings, and this is very interesting because Swamiji is actually approaching it more like the Buddhists do, on a sort of an operational basis. How it actually works in practice. Whereas Sri Ramakrishna has transcended that. And he's usually talking about it from the point of view of impersonal reality. The consciousness that is one, shall we say, facet of impersonal reality. Or he would say even, he called it Divine Mother, he tried to personalize it, he called it Mother. But that's basically what it was. So even though Swamiji mostly talks about consciousness in our ordinary level, most of the things I have in this are either, like I just spoke about, the subconscious or unconscious, and a little bit about the, what you call superconscious. Because otherwise we'd be here forever talking about consciousness, and we could have to do that another time. So, what does the science of yoga teach? It teaches that they were right in claiming that all this knowledge, they, meaning people who declare that things just come to them, they were right in claiming that all this knowledge came to them from beyond reasoning, but that it came from within themselves. So this is where we're talking about like intuitive flashes, where, like in a flash a person knows, like they say that Einstein knew exactly what it was he needed to prove, but it took him all the time to prove it. Okay, he knew what he wanted, but then he had to, create the mathematics or create the step-by-step approach to show that indeed what he had seen was so. Well, like that, the flash. So, the flash is what he's talking about, knowledge, I'm calling the flash. All this knowledge came to them from beyond reasoning, but it came from within themselves. As opposed to like in the old days, whatever, they would have said, oh, Saraswati gave me this information, or whatever. Okay. The yogi teaches that the mind itself has a higher state of existence beyond reason, a superconscious state, and when the mind gets to that higher state, then this knowledge beyond reasoning comes to man. Metaphysical and transcendental knowledge comes to that man. What is the use of such knowledge? Here we get to the crux of it. This all sounds very abstract. What is the use of such knowledge? It will take away all our misery. When, by analyzing his own mind, man comes face to face, as it were, with something which is never destroyed, something which is, by its own nature, eternally pure and perfect, he will no more be miserable, no more unhappy. All misery comes from fear, from unsatisfied desire. Man will find that he never dies, and then he will have no more fear of death. When he knows that he is perfect, he will have no more vain desires. And both these causes being absent, there will be no more misery. There will be perfect bliss, even while in this body. So it's not a vain, it's not a kind of a useless thing, academic, whatever. This is the thing that's also great about Hindu philosophy, is that it's a hands-on thing. It's not just speculative. So I'm going to go a little bit more into understanding, which is kind of another, we're going to go the type of understanding that goes beyond reasoning. Okay, so I counted one time, okay? He uses the word understand 190 times in the first 2 volumes of the complete works. And that doesn't mean, and sometimes, frequently it means in the sense of we will come to understand, and then he will say, whatever it is. But obviously understanding is extremely important. So let's just look at it a little bit. There's different levels, shall we say, of understanding. The first is what we just called ordinary. That would be to comprehend, to grasp. When we say, I get it, okay, I got it. All right, that's one kind of understanding. But we also have a problem with that sometimes because, as I mentioned it earlier in the other part on perception, we perceive through filters. Okay, and everybody has different filters based on their own experiences. And that means we're filtering some things out, and it also means sometimes that we're adding things in, and we're not aware of adding those things in. So Swamiji himself gives the example of a pearl oyster. Okay, to get a pearl, the oyster has to have within it a small, maybe grain of sand or some kind of an imperfection that somehow gets in the shell. And then in order to protect itself from that, the oyster builds a wall of enamel around that so that it can't irritate or whatever. And then that wall of enamel grows and grows until finally it becomes a pearl. That's how natural pearls are made. So he says, the ordinary man will never understand it. He's talking about the religious experience here. Because when he tries to do so, he throws out his own enameling. So not only are we filtering out the things that we don't want to see or don't understand, we're doing that unconsciously. We're not doing it consciously. And if we meditate, though, we learn where those places are and what we've been doing. That's one of the things we learn. But we're also throwing out our own enameling. We're trying to protect ourselves all the time. But it's become so habitual, we're not aware of it. So that we hold ourselves off from higher spiritual experience because we have all these weird ideas that somehow it's going to turn us into some kind of a monster or ghoul or something, or we're going to die or God knows what, No, we're going to be an integrated human being. So that's the ordinary level of understanding. It has its good points. Yes, we understand things that way. But also we have to be aware that we're always introducing misconceptions along with what we're understanding. The second level, I would say the intermediate level, would be more of a leap, a mental leap, but it's still kind of ordinary, and that is when we infer something, or we see into something, or behind something, or we try and penetrate or get the implications of something that's happening. Because somebody says something to you and you say, well, what does that mean? Or you leap to a conclusion as to what it means, and again, your leap may be right or it may be wrong in terms of what that person intended to say. And then finally, we look for a deeper significance or purport to life and more abstract notions, the more abstract things, not day-to-day things at all. So we can unpack these different levels of understanding. We can begin to see how they've influenced us in various ways in our life. And he says here, the mind wants to analyze its own self, to understand the workings of a human mind, what forces are working inside, and how to manipulate and obtain control over them. This is the mystical mind. Then there is the philosopher, who wants to weigh everything and use his intellect even but beyond the possibility of all human philosophy. So he's kind of comparing the Raja Yoga approach and the Jnana Yoga approach. But intellect there must be, and understanding there must be. And as soon as you know and understand what's what, the whole scene changes. So that's why, like I said, when you've seen the face, and where you used to see only the vase, or vice versa, and now you know they're both there, that's what he means by the whole scene changes. It's obvious to you. Something that was hidden has become obvious. Then we shall remain where we were, only we shall understand the whole thing. The same phenomena will remain, but with a new meaning. We shall see then that this so-called law or fate or destiny occupied only an infinitesimal part of our nature. On the other side, there was freedom all the time. All the different steps in yoga are intended to bring us scientifically to the superconscious state. The very fact that one man ever reached that state proves that it is possible for every man to do so. Not only is it possible, but every man must eventually get to that state, and that is religion. Experience is the only teacher we have. We may talk and reason all our lives, but we will not understand a word of truth until we experience it ourselves. We must take up the study of this superconscious state just as any other science. On reason we must have to lay our foundation. We must follow reason as far as it leads, and when reason fails, reason itself will show us the way to the highest plane. So it's about 4:20, and I would like to ask if anyone has questions before we break and go to our, something that needs to be clarified or anything like that before we break and have a little discussion again. Yeah.
Some time ago you said that, I'll wait. Some time ago you said the process to find religion will be similar to that for physics and chemistry. Reason has to be followed. But religion has an advantage that it has its own perceived truth. So that's an advantage. We could say that that part of what we call perceived truth, which I believe in, of course, could be that is the part that a so-called rationalist or a so-called materialist will say, that is the hanky-bunky, that's the bad thing. Because your reason, what you call as realization, you have already reached beyond reason, and that is all mysticism. Is there any argument which will say, just for argument's sake, that this is superior knowledge?
Well, first let me tackle it on a different level. Can you, if you meet someone who doesn't even know of the existence of something called a strawberry, therefore they have no idea how a strawberry tastes, can you explain to them how a strawberry tastes?
No way.
Okay, it's like that. This is why he keeps saying experience, experience, experience. Words cannot convey what a direct, even we're talking here on the sensual level, on the sensory level, okay? If even a sensory experience cannot be conveyed in words, how much less so a supramental experience, where even the mental level itself falls to pieces. It no longer functions. So consciousness itself then is shining in its own glory. Now, yes, they can give it a label. They can call it mysticism, they could call it humbug, they can call it whatever they want. But they're basically passing judgment on something that they have not yet experienced. And so from their mental level, because this is what they're doing, is they're applying their mind to it, there is no way that they can approach that without having some spontaneous, shall we say, flash of their own, or a certain degree of faith, as we ask students to do with Vedanta, that all these centuries of sages have said that this is so. Okay? You have to take at least as a working hypothesis the fact that they are correct. You have to at least take it as a working hypothesis and work with that information and find out for yourself, is it so or isn't it? And this is the approach that Swamiji is propounding. Okay. Now, those who are not interested in that quest, they can pass whatever judgments they want to on it. I mean, we can, for instance, we can pass judgments on people who go to whorehouses or whatever. I mean, we can pass judgments, but that doesn't. So what? You know, it's our judgment. We're not the one who's experiencing that thing. You know, whatever. And they're similarly doing the same thing. This is unfortunately what human beings do all the time. Make judgments about other people on very, very flimsy things. You know, color of their skin, you know, where they come from, male or female, you know, all this stuff. Very, very flimsy stuff. Consciousness inside, it's the consciousness inside that has in each person the potential. That's why Swamiji said everyone has the potential for divinity. That potential, at least, needs to be acknowledged, whether or not that person appears to be living in utter depravity or whatever, you know. So we can't judge them. Okay, remember that song that you read, you explained to us yesterday, that the Notch girl sang. Swamiji learned a lesson there himself. You can't judge another person like that. You can try and hold up an ideal. You can try and get them to strive for that. But if they fail in any particular way, you encourage them to pick themselves up and start again. There was a story from Swami Paramananda. By the way, all right, I'm going to make a plug for Paramananda. You know that book about Swami Paramananda, his life, called The Bridge of Dreams? How many have read that book? Okay, you've got to read that book. Okay, it is a biography. It is about his work in the West. So well written. It reads like a novel. It's a page turner. You hit the end of the chapter and you don't want to stop because it's like, okay, what happens next? You know, it's really excellent.
What is it called again?
A Bridge of Dreams. And in this book, the one thing that comes through over and over and over again, he was the one that was called, I believe, by Josephine MacLeod, but anyway, other people in that generation who knew Swamiji, he was called Little Swamiji. They called him Little Swamiji because he had the same great capacity for acceptance of everything. So in his life, and this was perhaps in the 1920s or 30s, something like that, there was one fellow who used to come for him for money, to borrow money, shall we say. And he was, the other people in Paramananda's community regarded this guy as, you know, a ne'er-do-well, you know, shyster type guy. You know, they didn't hold him in very, very high regard at all or anything. So So he'd come for money, and then after some time he'd come for money, and then he'd go away, and after some time he'd come and borrow some more money, And Swami kept giving him money. Paramananda kept, and his people would say, "Why do you do that, Swami? You're never going to get this money back." And he'd say, "Because he needs somebody to believe in him. He needs somebody to believe in him." So this kind of, he was Vedanta in practice, but he didn't, and there's a lot of little books that he wrote, Path to Perfection and Concentration, various little books that still sell, after all these decades. He always comes across very soft. He doesn't give high amount of philosophy. He translated the Gita, but it's a straight translation. There's no commentary. There's no notes like you get in a lot of them, footnotes and all that kind of stuff. It's just a straight translation. And he never gets into very high philosophy, but he lived it. He lived it, and he was able to transfer his zeal through his life to the people that he encountered. And so that's what comes through in the book. It's very well written, and I've used many times some quotes from him in different talks, or not so much quotes. It's not so much what he said, it's what he lived. How did I get there?
Because I had asked a question saying that isn't it vague reasoning to say that the truths coming through religion are of a different kind?
Right.
Are we shortchanging ourselves by saying that?
Yeah. No, it is. It's like a what do they call it? Several magnitudes of difference. Okay. You can't. It's like people who think they've been through a 4-point earthquake, that a 8-point is just going to be twice a 4-point. No, it is a logarithmic scale, and an 8-point is going to be magnitudes greater. Okay, it's like that with accessing higher levels of consciousness.
But even in science,
Mm-hmm.
as you just said,
Mm-hmm.
that Einstein first intuitively knew what he had to find out, and then he spent all his life, most of it.
Like 5 years or something it took him to actually get the math. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then, so intuitive knowledge is well established in science,
Mm-hmm.
but proof.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, proof. He has to show the other scientists that what he intuited is so,
Yes.
or at least is so sufficiently that they can't knock it down.
Yeah.
The theory is not disproven.
Yeah. And that proof is not always there in the religion. Is that it has to be experienced by individual people? Is that the difference?
I think it's the same. It's the same deal. Yeah, I think you have to. Each person has to reach that or be conveyed that. I mean, some people get it by praying ceaselessly for grace, and then ultimately then something opens up and they're ready and it pours in. There are different ways of doing it, but the other thing is we can never be certain. Like when it's going to work. Like Holy Mother would say, well, you think just because you're doing so much japa, you're going to get God that way, like buying an eggplant or something. That's not how it works. But you keep trying. You just try and settle the mind, try and become more and more integrated, and you do that by detecting how disintegrated you are. Oh, that's off. That's off the beam. I've got to rein that in. Whatever that is that you've detected, that is like really off. If people have maybe a tendency to fly off the handle, or maybe they, look down on certain kinds of people. people or whatever. You have to first detect your imperfection in order to cut it off or redirect it or whatever. And I'm not saying that we're going to become perfect human beings on this human level, but the mind is mutable. It is changeable. So why not, instead of letting it just run wild and do its own changes, why not direct those changes in a way that is more conducive to making an integrated human being?
I wanted to add what I earlier opposed. I said that I'm not convinced. Based on what she said, I just understood something else also. Swamiji says, and I think it's said elsewhere too, the reason we believe in many of the religious experiences because A, we trust the people who have gone before us. They are also scientists and they wrote about the experiences. And B, you can actually compare notes. If one does believe for a little while, have the shraddha to do that, then their experimental results can be compared with each other. And that's definitely true in Raja Yoga. It's almost laid out what you will get after what. But even in other places, you do get experiences which others said you would.
Mm-hmm.
It happened with Sri Ramakrishna himself when he was going through all these experiences. Later on, Bhairavi Brahmani comes and said, yeah, Gauranga had this, someone else had this.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a lot of proof also, proof so to say like us.
Swamiji wants to warn us away from what Swami Sridhar. Has Sridharananda come to this center?
No, but we saw him.
Okay. Well, he has this one phrase that I think is like utterly perfect, and that is he's talking specifically about Hindus, and he's saying that they know all these words, all these terms that come from the spiritual traditions, and therefore they think they know what it is. Okay? So he says, well, the way he puts it, I made a note myself when I heard him, they have an auditory acquaintance with these sounds. And therefore they toss these terms around, but they don't really know what it means. So what Swamiji is asking us to do is to delve into what do these words really mean, and what can they do for you once you do understand them. You know, it gives you a new perspective on your whole who you are. Now, this is even before you get to the point of I am the self. Okay, this is even just on the operational level. You begin to see yourself differently. Somebody who we don't have control over events around us. We don't have control over, our government, or to a certain extent we have a little bit of control over our health, but probably maybe only 10% of the whole thing. We have a certain amount of control over how we raise our kids, at least until they get to a certain age. But after that, there's no control. But therefore, the only thing that's left to us is our own being. That we can choose how to respond. How, rather than react, they always say, rather than react, which is just like an automatic thing, it's a habitual response to something. The objective is to have a more reasoned response, or a more moderate response, or a more controlled response. I don't know what words you want to say, but it's no longer coming from a habitual place. It is now like, okay, like they used to say, take a deep breath, count to 10, before you do something. Kind of like that. It's now coming under some degree of control. And that's the entire scope. That's the only scope that we have for controlling anything. We can't control the weather. We collectively may be warming up the planet to the point where, we're going to have weather problems, big weather problems. See, it seems that way. But all we can individually do is try and conserve as much as we can. That's it. And hopefully when we add up all the conservations from all the people, we'll have a little bit of effect on ameliorating the potential problem that they say is coming up. Like that. But at the very least, we won't be anxious about it if we have control on our mind. The anxiety about it will at least be, won't be happening. This is, face the brute, he used to say. Face it, whatever it is, face it head on. So, okay, look, we're going on 5 o'clock. Let us break. And how many ladies do I have in here now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 5. 6. Okay.
And including that little lady.
Oh, okay. She can sit in the middle of the circle. Okay, so the ladies want. We'll do the same thing. We'll take the second question. You choose one of the things under the second question to discuss, and then we'll have about 15 minutes or so for discussing, and then we'll come back and share. Okay? And the guys, the same thing. We had like 4 in the back there. How many guys do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, maybe we've only got enough for one group, unless there's.
One more. 6. We have 6.
You have 6.
6 and 1.
Well, maybe we should just make one group. For that again, also.
The same context of what you were saying.
Okay, we satisfied with that?
Oh, I have a quick question.
Okay.
So are you referring to a different mental freedom compared to actual, spiritual freedom? When you were just mentioning that?
Well, in terms of a response to a situation, see this question was kind of situation bound in a sense, because it says in any given situation. So I was talking within the framework of our lives as we live them, instead of always coming up with a habitual response to any given situation, if we step back, we find out and give ourselves the opportunity, we can find that, we may have more choices here than we thought. Now this is on an ordinary level, but by doing that, we're allowing the more fundamental spirit to come through, because a habit is going to keep you from perceiving, because it's like opaque. A habit is fixed, it's kind of opaque. But if we step back and kind of push the habit back a little bit away from it, allows the spirit to come through, and we can feel or at least explore the possibility of a different response in the situation. So, and that difference is being fueled from a spiritual source. Of course, it's percolated through the mind, because the mind is going to then come up with alternatives. Well, you really could do this, or you could do that. Oh, I never thought of that before. Let me try that. So, but you have to give yourself the opportunity to do that, rather than just bringing out the normal response. We're all like that. I mean, everybody's like that. I don't know. If people try to come at me first thing in the morning, honest to God, they really shouldn't. And some people never learn, and it's like I keep waiting for them to kind of learn, you don't come at me first thing in the morning. But, so then I just have to go, okay, all right. Okay, is that sort of what you're... Yeah, okay. Okay, so very brief summation here then. Per Swamiji. This truth is first to be listened to, then to be thought about. Reason, argue it out by all manner of means. The enlightened know no more than that. Know it for certain, that you are in everything. That is why you should not hurt anybody, because in hurting them, you hurt yourself. Lastly, this is to be meditated upon. Think upon it. Can you realize there will come a time when everything will crumble in the dust and you will stand alone? That moment of ecstatic joy will never leave you. You will actually find that you are without bodies. You never had bodies. I am one, alone, through all eternity. Whom shall I fear? It is all myself. This is continuously to be meditated upon. Through that comes realization. It is through realization that you become a blessing to others. So I'd like to end with the 6 stanzas on Nirvana by Sri Shankaracharya. And you will notice that we talked earlier about negation and affirmation. And you'll see that in this composition, I'll do it both in the Sanskrit and in English. It's quite long, but there's both negation and affirmation. Okay? Manobhujya hankara chitani naham nacha shrotra jive nacha grana netre nacha vyoma bhumir na tejo na vayuhu chirananda rupa shivoham shivoham. The mind, intellect, thought, the ego, I am not, nor hearing, nor tasting, nor smelling, nor seeing, nor space, nor earth, nor fire, nor forces. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. Nacha prana samyo navai pancha vayuhu nava sapta dhatu nava pancha koshaha nava pani padam nachopasta payuhu chirananda rupa shivoham shivoham. The prana, its 5 types of movement, I am not, nor physical components, nor sheaths of existence, nor organs, nor body parts, nor processes, nor functions. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. Na me dvesha rago, na me lobha moho, mado naiva me naiva matsarya bhavaha, na dharmo na charto na kamo na moksha, chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. No greed, no delusion, aversion, attachment, no egotism, envy, no duty, no purpose. I have no desire, I seek no freedom. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. Na punyam, na papam, na saukyam, na dukham, na mantro, na tirtam, na veda, na yajyaha, aham bhojanam, naiva bhojam, na bhokta, chidananda rupa, shivoham, shivoham. No virtue, no vice, no pleasure, no pain, no pilgrimage, no mantra, no sacrifice, no scripture. I am not enjoyer, enjoying, enjoyable. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. Na mritya, na sankha, Shankha na me jati bedaha pita naiva me naiva mata na janma na bandhur na mitram gurur naiva shishyam chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. No death there, no fear there, no class distinction, no father, no mother, no giving of birth there, no family, no friends there, no guru or disciple. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. Aham nirvikalpo nirakara rupo vibhutva cha sarvatra sarvindriyanam nacha sangatam naiva muktirnambeyaha chidananda rupam shivoham shivoham. I am all-pervading and formless and changeless, untouched by the senses, untouched by attachment, can't be comprehended nor be liberated. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. I am blissful consciousness of Shiva, of Shiva. Thank you all for coming.